Hey guys, it's that time of year to get your bikes ready for the season. On this 2001 Dyna, I'm going to be doing a set of mid controls and chain drive.
To start, we're gonna drain your primary oil, so this is good to do when you're ready for a service. And then I'm gonna make a little stencil with 12 holes for the primary bolts for the inspection cover. And I make a little stencil showing where I start with an arrow going around in a circle so you don't get confused where what goes. Now this process is going to take like 3 to 4 hours to do both, and then I'm editing the video in such a fashion to try to keep the time down as much as possible. Now that all the bolts are out, it's a good time to pull your primary cover and clean the gasket surfaces before moving on to the next step. Now we're going to pull this retaining clip out of the clutch, so you can take this actuating rod that goes to the other side out, and you're going to use 1 3/16 and go right hand. So you're going to go keep it because it's reverse thread and break that loose. I'm removing the primary chain tensioner because this is already cracked, and this is 1.5 inch socket to pull the compensator off regularly, which would be left hand. With bolts out, you can pull out your compensator and clutch. I keep them together like this, put everything in the exact order they come off so nothing goes missing or you get confused where it goes. Now I make the same little sketch. This time I drew it out and just put the holes where they go for each one. And each one of these nuts on the inside, the bolts on the inside have a retaining clip that you have to hammer back and pin over so you can get them out. Keep note that these locking tab washers should be replaced once removed. So as you can see on the sketch, you have the 6 locking tabs on the bolts on the inside and then the 2 nuts on the outside. And we're going to go to the other side and pull the starter, which is this Allen head, I think quarter. So we're going to pull these 2 bolts out and then flip back to the other side of the starter, which you can do beforehand. I'm going to take a rag and just wrench the whole starter gear and pull this small little bolt out. Be careful because these are known to break, and once they do, they're a real pain in the ass to get out. Take note, when you take the starter off, you can leave the bolts in place. Just make sure they're not threaded into the inner primary. And when you pull it off, we're going to go right to the inner pulley, pull the retaining clip off, and then we're going to take an 1 7/8 nut with reverse thread to take this bolt off. But it's a custom socket I am using. You can order one that's already ready to go, but they are pricey. Once this is off, you're ready to go. We can take the rear wheel off now that we don't need tension on the belt. And we're going to get right into it and put the sprocket onto the rear wheel. For me, all the bolts pulled out right with the impact. Sometimes you might have to add a little heat, but pull that off. We're going to clean up the threads. We're using a little bit of oil, just getting any of the Loctite up so you don't destroy new threads. Add the spacer, sprocket, and this is the Hughes hand-built sprocket lock. It's a 2-piece system, so you have the backing plate that goes against the sprocket, and then the other piece is going to hold the bolts from rotating on the outside. What I'm doing is adding red Loctite because these bolts are known to back out and cause a lot of damage. Bolts are in, so we're going to torque them down the spec. The spec on this Dyna is 55 to 65 foot-pounds for the rear pulley bolts. And now we're going to try to put the cover back on. And once you cut it back on, you might have to move one a little bit, just a little bit extra, just to get these savers on. I put blue Loctite on those little retaining bolts that hold the other side of the saver on because I'm not too worried about that falling off. But these Dyna rear sprocket bolts are known for blasting off, ruining your wheels. So these are everything I'm adding to the bike. So you need the cosmetic gasket kit for all the gaskets in the primary, your chain kit, and these are pieced together mid controls and floorboards. Now, if you want to take your belt off and save it, I recommend doing that in case you ever go back. You can just pull your rear shock off, and it makes it a little bit easier to get the chain on as well. While putting the wheel back on, I'm going to make sure I also check that my wheel tensioners are all the way buried in so the wheel is closest to the swing arm so you can get the shortest chain possible on there. This way, when the train does start to stretch a little bit, it doesn't max out and you can't tighten it anymore. When you put the chain on, you can either mark the link or bend it, but this is nice and snug. I'm not going to go too tight because then you can't adjust the chain to make more slack. I'm going to take a die grinder or grinder. You can just cut the link off and then pop it through the other side. You don't want to damage the links that you're using, but cutting this off won't affect the chain itself because those O-rings in there are garbage anyway. When putting the chain back on the bike, I keep the Master Link handy so we can just pop it through while we're setting it up on the bike. And I use this Motion Pro tool. The reason I didn't use the rivet link is because I did not have one when I did this video. But I recommend using rivet links over Master Links any day of the week, especially on these big Harleys. If you're watching, I did add grease to the link before installing it. And then I'm using the Motion Pro kit to press the link on. So from the other side, I can push the master clip on. And make sure when you put these master clips on, they are going towards the bike on the closed end, so you don't end up popping one off when you're riding. When you tighten your chain, you want to come out evenly with both adjusters, and you also want to look for about an inch of play. Too tight, you ruin your sprockets and countershaft seal. Too loose, it can pop off and make some damage. Before you get to put the inner primary on, you need to put a new gasket between the motor and the inner primary. It's a O-ring like fixture, and you just want to clean everything off before doing that. And now I'm just putting the bolts in the inside, not putting ones next to each other, kind of like a star pattern, just spreading out the distribution of torque. Now I'm putting the starter back in, and just in the order I took it out, and I put a little tap of blue Loctite on that long screw. And then after you get that in, tighten it down, and we're going to peen over the locking tab washer. And when all the bolts are in, make sure you add a little bit of Loctite just so they don't back out. But these locking tabs are necessary to keep them from rotating inside and ruining your primary. To take a note, this is not the original inner primary we took off the bike because it had an aftermarket chrome one. This one actually had the hole for the mid control, unlike the one that came off the bike, and it's set to the farthest notch towards the bike, so it comes out the most. Now when you put your primary chain on, make sure you go on top of the slider, not like when I first did. Now to fix that. But now this clutch basket is really tight to get off, so I'm going to line up the splines, just lightly tap it with a hammer and a piece of wood. This is not really hard tapping, it's just to get it to seat well, and since it was a very tight process to get on. Moving on to the compensator, this is technically a torque to spec item, and then you're supposed to replace the nut every time. I have done many bikes where I did not replace the compensator nut. I just add a little red Loctite and torque it down to 75 foot-pounds plus 45 degrees after you hit that torque spec. You may also notice I have a wood shim in between. It's a cut piece of 2x4, just a wedge in there. They make wedges already made that you can get for pretty cheap. I just didn't have any on hand. So now for the clutch hub nut, it's 80 foot-pounds. I add red Loctite and make sure you're going reverse. So you're going to actually go left hand to tighten it and right hand to loosen it. Now I'm adjusting the primary chain. You want about 5/8 up and down play. I just check it with a square and it's good to go. Now throw in your clutch rod and your clutch mechanism that gets held in by the C-clip. And take note, you don't want to put this in the way it was originally in the bike. You're going to have to readjust it. I'm going to do it after I put the primary cover on, but you can do it right now also. So now you can clean off your gasket surface and add your gasket, and then you're ready to put your primary cover on. I put a little bit of blue Loctite in each bolt, coming out of the 1 to 12, and this is actually the torque sequence that you should follow when tightening down this primary cover. And moving on, I'm going to add some oil into the inspection cover. Make sure you put your drain plug back in. You can put a little Teflon on there or new O-ring depending what year you have. And this is the oil I'm using, the Maxima Care Kit. It's full service. This is just the primary fluid from it. I forgot to mention that the shift shaft was installed on the farthest position of the clips. So the clip actually went into the farther position where the O-ring wasn't. Now I'm just taking a piece of wood, tapping on the inspection cover. If you don't put it in that position, your shift shaft will actually be too far out on the inside and you won't be able to put your shift on properly. Again, just add the bolts of a dab of blue Loctite and they should be good. Add your shifter. It's easier to do it once you have the mid control on so you know your position you want. You can adjust it a little bit on the shaft between the transmission and the shift shaft, but it's easier just to change your spines. Now, since it's a new floorboard, it might take a few tries to get the proper position between the floorboard and the shifter. Whatever looks comfortable might not feel comfortable, so it's better off putting a foot on there and getting the right position before tightening it down. These floorboard bolts came with pre-Loctite, and I added a little dap of blue Loctite onto the shifter. And now that they're all ready to go, you're going to tighten them down, and you're good to go on this side. Moving on to the brake side. Now the shifter is just kind of easier to take the exhaust off. I was just being lazy because I didn't have the exhaust gaskets. So I'm tightening on the back side and tightening up the mid. It's going to take a couple turns, but you'll see the difference on the brake pedal start to move down. Again, to get the proper position, you're going to want to put your foot on there, but you're going to want to match these floorboards on each side, or your toe pegs, whatever you want to call it, your foot pegs. You want them to be even and parallel, so there's not one more lean than the other for a more comfortable ride. Moving on to the last part, we're taking off the derby cover. Now it's already full of oil, but we are going to adjust the clutch. Like I said, you can do this before you put the cover on. I just didn't do it because I want to replace this gasket anyway. So now I'm going to go and turn it in until it just feels like it touches. And then I'm going to turn out a half turn to 3/4 of a turn and tighten it with the socket. Also note, if you didn't do this already, you should have this fully loose before you do that step. You should have that all the way out, and then you go tighten it up just so there's a little bit play in the lever, and you're ready to add your new gasket and derby cover back on. Thank you for watching Slaps Garage. I am not doing an outro because this video is already longer than I normally make them, so thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you want more content.